Okay, so what exactly is open innovation and open talent? Well, that's what we wanted to know, and we thought, who better to ask than Steve Rader, who for years headed up NASA's Tournament Lab and Center for Collaborative Excellence. In this episode, Steve is going to walk us through what open innovation is, how it's going to be used, and how it affects you.
Steve, it's really, really nice to have you here on the Challenge Your Ordinary show, and fantastic to connect with you. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing excellent. I'm 1 week into retirement, and I know, right? So I'm very excited about that. I just 1 week ago today, I retired from 32 years in the civil service at NASA, and so it's starting a new chapter. So it's quite exciting.
Well, on this Friday, I'm honored to be able to say happy week anniversary in the new chapter.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So with the work, I mean, obviously 32 years in that environment, you would have certainly learned a number of things and certainly contributed to a number of things. And it would be great to kind of pick at your mind and your experience to see what we can gain from, because I understand you're pretty passionate in the world of teams and identifying the role of the I in teams as a bit of a controversial way to look at that old saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten to work on some amazing high-performing teams throughout the years in Space Station and Space Shuttle and X-38 and Constellation, and then most recently in NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, which is our open innovation work, where I helped lead that for, the past, since 2013, so whatever that is, 12 years.
That is incredible. And I know you to be a keynote speaker as well. So.
Yeah, it turns out when you're really passionate about something, it turns into talk. And, I also was kind of the outreach arm for our open innovation work at NASA for a long time. And so anytime you have a new kind of tool or a new thing that you're trying to get out there, you've got to sell it. And so I ended up giving the same talk 3-4 times a week for 6, 7, 8 years, and so that was really great, because I really am passionate about how effective open talent and open innovation are during this really rapid time of change and technology growth.
Fantastic. So if someone was to jump into this conversation and say, hang on, you just said open talent and open innovation. Could you describe those to me? What does that mean?
Yeah, it all started with open innovation, which is the idea of going outside of your organization or your team to find solutions. So that's mainly crowdsourcing. So we actually put together a portfolio of about 50 different commercial crowds that range anywhere from 10,000 members to, I think our largest was 78 million users. And we would post challenges that say, look, we have this hard problem that we're trying to solve, galactic cosmic radiation, or something to do with lunar wheels, or all sorts of things that go really the gamut of algorithms and software. And we would hand them over to these platforms that have a crowd, and then they would set up a challenge and run that challenge to find the best ideas. And what we discovered was that it is one of the most effective tools given where we are with technology. We have a pace of change in technology and a growth of change in technology that is unprecedented, right? We are on this kind of part of the curve that we're not familiar. A lot of people don't realize, and I say this in my talk all the time, that someone did a study of that curve and where we are, and what they found was, due to population growth and the increase in wealth around the world and the number of education institutions that have been stood up in the last 40, 50 years, right now there are estimated to be 90% of all scientists that have ever lived on planet Earth. In other words, 9 times more than ever, if you added up all the scientists that lived prior to today. We have 9 times that many working right now. I know, and they're not using paper and pencil. They're using ChatGPT and other AI and machine learning and 3D printing and CRISPR and APIs that are able to do all sorts of great tools and great software tools, right? And so what we're seeing is this multiplication that people don't really understand. And what's happening is all those tools I mentioned work across every industry. And so suddenly you have technology maturation and new ideas and ways people are applying these new technologies in every industry. And the solutions they're coming up with aren't always specifically for that industry. They can actually pop over here. So for instance, Subsea 7 was trying to find a way to understand undersea pipelines, not understand, but monitor and inspect them. And they would take a ship out at $1 million a day, put a van-sized piece of equipment in next to that pipeline, and then take about 2 weeks to monitor. They went, and using open innovation, they were able to find a technology already in use in the mining industry that was handheld and could do that job in 2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
And what they said was, this is great, it's 100x improvement, right? But if we had not found this technology before our competitors, we wouldn't be in this business. And that's that change people make. So open innovation, crowdsourcing, crowd challenges, and it's finding those people that understand your problem because maybe they have some experience with that, but also live in another world where they have access to other technology. So that's open innovation. Open talent is something we discovered once we were in the open innovation world. We found that many of the platforms we were using to run challenges also did gig economy stuff. So freelancer is a great example, right? That's the main purpose of that, is to find a freelancer to help you do stuff. And they happened to have some contests, so we were using the contest piece. But what we discovered is that same change in technology is causing an issue within companies because there are so many new skills that they need. And if your only mechanism to onboard those skills is full-time recruit and retain talent, then you're quickly going to reach a max. And so you'll hire all these people, but you still won't have all the skills because there's so many coming on board every day and you don't even know the ones you need. And so I'm finding more and more HR folks that will say, yes, we have a skill shortage and a hiring freeze because they're trying to desperately get all those skills on board, but the math doesn't work anymore. And so open talent is leveraging this huge change. I actually believe it's the largest change that we've seen in the workforce and organizations in 120 years.
Is that right?
We saw back in 2015 that there were predictions that within like 2027, 2028, that over half of the workforce will be freelance and not full-time. And we saw that back then. We saw, oh my gosh, if we don't change our ways, we're suddenly not going to be able to find the skills we need to run. And it is that agility to adapt to the changing technologies that really keeps a lot of companies, especially technical companies, afloat. And so we started looking at that, and sure enough, we were seeing this voluntary migration of workers. And in fact, then the pandemic hit and it spiked. And so we're seeing that people are actually at the very high end of all the skills is freelance work. And if you want to actually stay abreast of everything, you need a component, if you're an organization, that can find that expert. And maybe I need a quantum sensing expert that simply comes in for a week and a half to meet with my design team. And then if it turns out we need quantum sensing, then I mobilize and maybe I even bring on a full person. But it is that kind of ability to be agile and bring those folks in and make them part of your team. This is the thing. People have a kind of a bias against freelancers in that they think of it kind of like people thought of outsourcing, right? Which is I ship a job over and overnight somebody does something and then it comes back. But what we're finding is startups are starting to create these mini labor ecosystems where they don't hire full-time folks. They actually find a freelancer that does a great job with something, and they simply go to them every time they need that. And if that person's not available, they start to build a bench. And so you get this very flexible kind of workforce that you can still have culture, you can still get to know it, you can build trust, you can get everyone familiar with your processes. You just don't own them. And I think that's a key component, right? we're finding that people really want agency so that they actually can develop their careers, and it's not that someone owns their 8 hours. Something the pandemic really showed people was, I can get all of this work done at home, or at least a good chunk of it, and I don't have all these constraints, right?
Yep.
And also, freelancers can be on-prem. They actually can be part of your team, even if you want them in person. It's just a matter of the construct. And again, the only thing you're giving up is, when I don't have work for you, you are free to go and get other work, right? That's really it. So I don't own their time. I don't own all of their tasks, but I have to pay for it and I have to manage it. And in fact, on our team when I was at NASA, we actually hired 3 freelancers to be part of our team. And they would come to our retreats and they would be part of our team meetings. But they allowed us to scale because we had kind of a roller coaster of a workload. And it was a given that we would give them less work when we actually didn't have it, and we would give them lots of work. But we knew that they all had other tasks they could be doing. So you didn't think as much about, oh, I'm firing. No, you're not laying them off. You're simply getting that flex, right? And the last part of that, I'll just say, is we learned that one of the things that's really important these days is really the workforce needs agile upskilling. And in a regular organization, the average budget is like $1,000 US per person per year for training. And yet, if you look at like the World Economic Forum, they had a report that said, look, 60% of all the workforce is going to have to change skills, and their skills that they need are literally going to change by about 50%, anywhere from 30 to 50%. And they're going to require anywhere from 1 to 6 months of training. Well, that's not $1,000. $1,000,
No.
and in fact, most of that $1,000 is safety and compliance and security training, right? So it's not even upskilling people. And so companies just aren't the place that you go to get all the training you need to stay competitive. And often they're not actually aware of all the skills to stay competitive. So what I've been recommending is, hey, there's a free training program for you out there if you're an organization. And that is to set up an agreement with your employees that says, hey, look, I'm going to give you 5%, 10%, you pick the number. But part of your job is going to be to go out there and use open innovation and open talent platforms, and maybe give them some training on that, to find the skills and things that you think you can bring back and contribute. And you have them kind of do a plan, but then here's the cool thing. You say, any money you make in prizes, any money you make in the open talent community, you get to keep. So it's not only free, it's incentivized with cash. And in your agreement, you say, make sure you don't, share any intellectual property. Here's the guidelines, whatever. But it's a free training mechanism. And in fact, my last 5 years at NASA, I had approval from lawyers to go out and actually do a side gig, which is mostly training and speaking and other things. But in that experience, I got to work with oil companies and waste management and insurance companies and religious organizations. It was this very wide set. And I learned from every single one of those. And in many cases, learned things that I could bring back to NASA and use in my work there. So it's free. Anyone who thinks that they can't give up 5 or 10% of an employee's time doesn't understand how employee time works, right? That is so in the noise, right? And it's an incentive to help them. So anyway, it's kind of an exciting stuff. So those were 2 really long answers to one very short question, but there's a lot there.
Now, so say if there was folks that are watching this that are thinking, I would love to do exactly what Steve just said. I would love to have some of my time allocated towards external learning. It's an increase in my revenue potential. What could you say to that person? What would those steps look like? How could they step out into this big wild world and take on some of these, take a bite out of the gig economy pie?
When I was at NASA, our Center of Excellence didn't just do challenges and open innovation work or open talent work for NASA. We actually worked across the entire federal government. So we had federal agencies coming to us, CDC and the EPA and Homeland Security and all these really high power organizations, and they're still to this day doing a bunch of work on these platforms. And what we found was Homeland Security came to us and they were trying to improve those airport scanners, you stand in that scan you. They ran a $2 million challenge. So it was $1.5 million of prize money on Kaggle. And this was 5 or 8 years ago. But what was fascinating was they ended up getting this 98% answer that blew them away. They were like, this is the best money we've ever invested in this. But what was really interesting is they had this data set. They actually hired models to stand in the machine with kind of a simulated weapon sometimes or sometimes not. And they compile this data set for folks to use to train their machine learning. And what was really interesting is at the end of the day, they solved it really well and got this great solution. And I think it came from someone in the finance or biology area. So it was totally somebody in a different area, not the same sensing. But one of the winners was 5th place winner. He won $100,000, was a freshman at Berkeley who was learning machine learning. He literally was walking through a course and he was using this example to practice. And he got to the part where it said, you have to train this model with as much data as you can get. Well, there were only so many samples that Homeland Security provided, right? And so he happened to also know Blender, which is this free tool used to make video game characters. And he goes, these data set, these people are these kind of monochrome, 3D images. He goes, I can make those in bulk with a script, and he literally made it so that he could create people. I don't know if you've ever seen these video game characters, but you literally can change the body fat on a skeleton and with a different skin, do all these kind of really cool things. So he just kind of made a script that made all of these people and generated thousands and thousands where the angles were different and the body fat was different, the height was different, and where the location of the weapon was different. And then he trained his model with that, and his model was better because that's the way machine learning works. If you give it lots of data, you'll have a better model. But that's the kind of thing people don't realize. Open innovation is this place where you can play. And what I tell people is, it is the one place that you can go, try your hand at something, fail, and nobody cares. But then you can get feedback on your design or on what you've tried, and suddenly you're learning at a pace that you don't get through just sitting through a class, right? You're doing. And I think that's an important piece.
And I was thinking, I have an observation in terms of culture, and I'm interested in your viewpoint on this. So the frame of this show, so it's called Challenge the Ordinary on Purpose. We really like things that kind of challenge people's thinking, get them to think, and maybe at some point, hopefully, do things a bit differently. Now, in terms of culture, when it comes to open talent and bringing in, say, freelancers or people with specific skill set for specific time, I could imagine that this is not a risk for culture in organizations. I mean, because if leaders wanted to look down the track and say, well, yeah, we need all of our people in full time because that's what's establishing the culture. But couldn't it be that you're actually strengthening your culture because A, you have to be more aware of it. You're constantly clear on the folks that are coming through the door, these women and men that are doing part-time, open talent-based work. We need to be best dressed for them because they want them to choose us. Not they have to choose us because we bought their salary.
Culture is very biased against freelancers right now. And Balaji Bandili was at Deloitte for many years, and he actually did something brilliant because he started seeing the power of freelancers. And he actually, when people would ask for talent at Deloitte, they would kind of go through this matching thing that wouldn't tell them if it was a full-time employee, a contractor, or a freelancer, so that they couldn't bias their decision on it. Because when they didn't do that, they found people would just go with the full-time person because they trusted them more. And again, trust is one of these things that you have to start to understand and unpack and be intentional. You mentioned the intentionality of culture. I think that is absolutely right. The team I led used to have most of the folks in the office and then a few people that were virtual, and we had that hybrid thing kind of going. And We weren't close personally. We didn't act as a high-performing team. We had some, we all would do our jobs and it would work. But when the pandemic hit and we all were remote, then we started to be very intentional about culture. We said, look, we're going to have virtual happy hours. We had the COSI, Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, we would call COSI. We had COSI cribs where each person would kind of show their house around and show what's in their fridge. But it was this huge team building. And then we recognized in-person still matters. So 3 to 4 times a year, we would have a week where we come together. And the focus was going out to dinner and doing team building and working on some face-to-face projects. But that's all it took. Because what you realize is in the real world, when people are seeing each other every day, they're actually not. We work in a largely digital world where they're in their cube looking at their computer most of the day. And yes, we have meetings, but in-person meetings are notoriously unaffected, and people don't need to be there for most of it, but they're required to be there. And so they're sitting through all this. The virtual world lets you multitask better, right? And you have to be more intentional about engagement in meetings. And it really starts to become this thing where, like our meetings, we would make sure, hey, we're going to tell you if you're on standby and you can be doing other work. And otherwise, we expect you to be engaged in this. And we had cameras on. There was no cameras off meeting. You had to be there. And then I would do literally 30-minute one-on-ones every month with every single person on the team so that we made sure that we're addressing all the things. Culture is just culture. It actually isn't dependent, like in our minds, we think it's dependent on people being in a place for a certain time. But the reality is you create intersections of people. You create team. And honestly, the old model is what I think of as the lazy manager model, because you can pretend to be engaged by walking around, like management by walking around. Even as a good manager, that's a good management technique, right? But unless you're asking the right questions and you're engaging in the right ways, it becomes Office Space, right? The movie was a hit because it was a reality of someone breathing down reports. Exactly, yeah. And all of those things are real. They building resentment and the rest in the workplace, that's not how you get better work done. You inspire people. You get them working on things that are interesting. And the gig economy actually provides a real market driven approach to work people don't want to do. In other words, I can do the work I love all day long, but if it doesn't actually get me a lot of return because no one values it, maybe I need to have scrubbing toilets as a thing I do on the side because I know it'll make me money, right? I would just say it's a lower barrier of entry than you think. The barrier of entry is in your head, right? And hire somebody to do a logo or do a contest to come up with a new logo, or take your pitch deck and hand it off to a freelancer to improve, or create an infographic about your business by running a little contest on one of these platforms, right? And if I treated people fairly and didn't just lowball all the time, I could really find some interesting people, and I could go on and on about the people I met through this that have literally I've followed now and have gone from not a lot of capability to these amazing, TED Talk people. Like it's really crazy. So we could definitely have a follow-on conversation at some point.
I love that. Hey, thank you so much for the time on this. It's an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to next time as well.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for your interest in this episode. It was a lot of fun to have a conversation with Steve and learn from him on open innovation, open talent, and how people are actually using this in the workplace now, and how it is going to possibly impact the way we do business with our teams. If you have any questions or comments, drop a comment below. Comments, that's where the comments go. And we look forward to bringing you more content here very soon.